They posted me like a trophy, tagged my name, wrote, "Happy Mother's Day to the strongest woman we know," put up baby pictures, added hearts and hashtags like they was giving me flowers. But you know what never came? A knock on my door. Not one. I sat there with 3 plates warming in the oven. I'd laid out my Sunday dress, put on the lotion I like 'cause I thought maybe they still remembered. But they didn't. Their wives said I was too much of a troublemaker for speaking my mind, for telling the truth, for not shrinking myself just to fit in their new little worlds. So I sat there quiet. But the next day, I picked up the phone and made one quiet call that changed everything. And no, they didn't see it coming. If you've ever been left behind by the very people you raised, if you've ever sat in a quiet house on a loud holiday, if your name only comes up when it's convenient, when they need something to post, not someone to call, then pull up a seat. 'Cause you and me, we got more in common than you think. I don't care if you're sitting in Georgia or Seattle, a small apartment in the Bronx, or a porch in Alabama. If you've ever cried in the kitchen so no one would hear you, if you've ever stared at a phone hoping it would ring, if you've ever felt like your love was something they outgrew, then baby, this story ain't just mine, it's ours. So tell me where you're watching from. Drop your truth in the comments, or send it straight to my email on the description below. I read every single one. 'Cause around here, we don't let silence write the ending. We speak it. And today, we speak it together. My name is Loretta Mae Johnson. I was born and raised just outside Montgomery, Alabama. Married young, widowed younger. My husband passed when our youngest boy was just 7 years old. I still remember the night I told them. Marlon, the oldest, he just stared at the floor. Royce tried to act like he was fine. Devin, the little one, just cried in his sleep. From that moment forward, I knew I had no choice but to be everything. Not just a mother, a provider, a protector, a teacher, a shelter. I worked 2 jobs most of my life. Mornings in a diner, nights cleaning offices after folks went home. Came home with swollen feet, hands rough from bleach and dishwater. But I never let him see me break. I gave up my own dreams. There was a time I wanted to teach, maybe open a little shop, sell handmade quilts, but I folded those dreams into laundry baskets and school lunches, because they needed more than I did. I didn't raise boys, I raised men. Or, at least I thought I did. Marlon, my firstborn, was always the quiet one, thoughtful, never said too much. Royce was the peacemaker, always trying to make sure nobody was mad at him. And Devin had charm. The kind that made folks lean in when he talked. He married up, found himself a woman with money, big house, big opinions, and when they got married, when they all got their own households, their own rules, that's when I noticed something shift. I didn't feel like their mother anymore. I felt like an old obligation they didn't know what to do with. The woman they used to call for advice became the woman they stopped calling at all. And slowly, I wasn't the woman they protected. I became the problem they avoided. It was 2 Mother's Days ago. I remember it plain as daylight. I got up early that morning, like I always do. Washed my hair, pressed my dress, laid out the good plates. The ones with the little roses round the rim. I made every one of their favorites. Fried chicken for Marlon, baked macaroni for Royce, that cornbread casserole Devin used to sneak into before it even cooled. I cooked enough to feed them and the grandkids. Even set 3 separate place settings for the kids, plastic cups with their names in Sharpie like I always used to. Noon came, then 2, I checked my phone. Nothing from Marlon, nothing from Royce. Then at 3:12 p.m., Devin finally texted, "We'll swing by later, Ma." So I kept the food warm, turned the oven down to low, lit a candle on the table. I sat by the window in the den, right where I could see the driveway. Every time I saw headlights, I sat up straight. But every car kept on driving. By 6 o'clock the food had dried out, by 7 the candle burned down to the glass. By 8 the sun was gone and my porch light was still on. And I knew they weren't coming. Not one of them. No call, no knock. Just a cold plate of food and a quiet house. I didn't cry that night. I just sat there and listened to the tick of the kitchen clock. That was the first time I realized the shift I'd been feeling wasn't just about distance. It was about desire. They didn't want to come, and that cut deeper than any silence ever could. It wasn't just the missed Mother's Day that told me something had changed. It was what came after, in the small cracks where truth tends to slip out, like the day my youngest granddaughter called me just to chat, and when I asked if they were all busy, she hesitated and said real soft, "Mom said you always ruin the mood." And I remember sitting there holding the phone, trying not to let my voice crack, trying to respond like I didn't just hear the knife twist, but it didn't stop there. Royce's wife, the one who used to hug me tight and call me Ma like she meant it, told him I make people uncomfortable now, said I always bring up things they don't want to talk about, like how hard it was raising them with nothing but my hands and God. And then came Marlon's wife, the one with the soft voice but sharp tone, who told him not to bring me around no more, not to let me visit for the holidays 'cause I talk too much about the past and stress everybody out, like my memories were some kind of burden, like my truth was an eyesore at their polished dinner tables. And in all that, I started to see clear. It wasn't that they forgot me. It was that they'd outgrown me, or at least they thought they had. And in their new lives, with their matching outfits and their curated smiles, there just wasn't room for a mother who remembered where the bones were buried and wasn't afraid to say it out loud. And I sat there with that weight in my chest, not quite anger, not yet grief, just that hollow realization that I'd been uninvited quietly. That I wasn't welcome anymore, not because I did wrong, but because I didn't stay small. And in that silence, I asked myself the question that hurt worse than any insult. How'd I go from mama to menace? A few days after that empty Mother's Day, when the food had gone cold and the silence had carved itself into every corner of the house, my phone rang, and it was my youngest granddaughter, Zariah, 17, the only one who still called just to hear my voice. And she sounded different this time, not her usual bubbly self, but choked up, her words heavy, like she'd been holding them in too long. And she said, "Granny, are you okay? I saw the post, but you didn't answer the door, and Mom said you were probably just resting, but I don't believe that." And I sat there in that chair with the phone pressed against my ear and told her the truth. Not the polished version, but the whole of it. How I cooked and waited, and no one came. How I sat through 10 hours of empty, how I didn't even hear a knock or see a single car slow down on the block. And she went quiet for a second. Then all I heard was her whisper. "That's not right. That's not right at all." And before I could say another word, she said, strong this time, "I'm coming over next weekend, Granny. I don't care what they say." And in that moment, something cracked open inside me. Not healed, not fixed, but cracked just enough for light to get in because someone still saw me. Someone still chose me on purpose, not out of duty or guilt or public show. And that spark in her voice reminded me I hadn't disappeared completely, not yet, not to everyone. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, sat in my kitchen with a mug of cold coffee and last night's dishes still in the sink. And after staring out that window for what felt like hours, I walked over to the drawer where I kept the folder they all used to ask about. The one with the papers they assumed would pass from my hands to theirs. And I opened it slow, every page a memory, every signature a stitch in the life I built by hand. And then I picked up the phone. Not shaking, not angry, just clear. And I called my lawyer, a woman named Clarissa, who's been with me since before Devin grew his first mustache, and I said, "It's time to make some changes." And I meant it, because I wasn't going to let my silence keep rewarding their absence. And for the next 2 hours, I sat there, while we rewrote the truth in black ink, revoked the family trust that was supposed to help them build legacies they couldn't even honor in person, reassigned the deeds to the property they'd already forgotten they came from, and took every bit of what I had, my jewelry, my savings, my stocks, the bonds I kept tucked away for their children, and redirected it all to a women's shelter a few towns over. One where I knew mothers slept beside their babies on metal beds, mothers who knew struggle, sacrifice, and silence just like I did. And I told Clarissa, they may not have seen my worth, but maybe someone else still can. Because I didn't want flowers at my funeral from people who wouldn't knock on my door while I was still breathing. And I didn't want my love to be handed out to hands that only reached for me when it benefited them. So I left every penny to women who never asked for much, just to be seen, just to be remembered, the way I once did. It didn't take long before the phone started ringing, and I knew the moment Royce's name lit up my screen that the silence I'd been sitting in had finally reached their side of the fence. So I answered on the third ring, calm as ever, and he didn't even say hello, just jumped right in with, "Mama, what's this about the trust? Why would you change it without talking to us first?" And I leaned back in my chair, looked at the same table I used to feed them around, and said, "It's not about money, it's about truth, and what happens when you let people forget it." And he started stumbling over words, trying to explain, saying he didn't know it had hurt me that bad, that they were just busy, that Mother's Day had snuck up on them. And I didn't say much because I'd already heard it all in their silence. Then Devin called next, voice full of that same charm he always used when he was trying to smooth things over, talking fast, making excuses, saying his wife thought it'd be better if they celebrated with just the kids this year, that it wasn't personal, and I just let him talk until he ran out of breath. And when he finally said, "You could have at least told us before you did something so drastic," I told him, plain as day, "You could have at least come to the door before you posted me like a trophy." And then there was Marlon, who didn't call, just sent a text that said, "We should talk." And I stared at that message for a long time before deleting it, because I realized in that moment that none of them had really come to talk in years. Not to ask how I was really doing, not to check if I needed anything, not to see me as more than a name in their phone or a photo on their feed. And no, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't curse or explain myself. I just let the silence make the noise, because sometimes that's louder than anything words could ever say. A few Sundays after the storm had passed, and the phone had finally stopped ringing, I got up early and cooked again. Not for them this time, but for myself. And for Zariah, who came through the front door with her curls pulled up and arms full of groceries she bought with her part-time paycheck, insisting she'd help this time. And we moved around that kitchen like two women who knew how to build joy from scratch, laughing over spilled flour and over-seasoned greens, setting the table, not out of habit, but out of love. And as we sat down to eat, just the two of us, she looked at me and said, "Granny, this is better than anything they ever gave you." And I nodded, because I knew she was right, because that meal wasn't soaked in disappointment. It was seasoned with truth, and served warm without waiting for anyone else to show up. And when the plates were cleared and the laughter had settled into soft hums, I poured myself a glass of sweet tea, stepped out onto the porch, and watched the sun make its slow way down behind the trees. The same porch where I once waited and hoped and counted headlights. But now I just sat in silence, not looking for anything, just feeling the peace settle into my bones like it had been waiting for me all along. And I realized right then that while they had chosen distance, I had chosen something better. I chose peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had finally come home to myself. It was a few weeks later, just after sunset when the air still held a little warmth, but the sky was already starting to darken, that I heard a knock at the door. Not rushed or loud, just soft and hesitant. The kind of knock someone gives when they're not sure if they even deserve to be heard. And when I looked through the window, I saw Marlon standing there by himself. No wife, no kids, just him. Shoulders slumped, holding nothing but the weight of what he hadn't said for far too long. And I opened the door just a crack, left the chain on, and looked at him through the space between us. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And he looked me in the eye with the kind of tired I recognized, the kind that comes from carrying guilt, and he said, "I didn't know it got this far." And I just nodded slowly and replied, "It always gets this far when nobody's willing to listen early." And he didn't argue, didn't deflect, didn't make excuses. His voice cracked, and then the tears came, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet streaks down a face I once used to wipe with the edge of my apron, and I let him cry, not out of obligation, but because I knew that sometimes tears are the only apology a man knows how to give. And I didn't yell, I didn't open old wounds. I just stood there on the other side of that locked door and let the silence carry what words couldn't fix. And when he asked if we could talk again soon, I said maybe one day I'll open this door all the way. And I meant it, but not today. Because healing doesn't always come when they're ready. It comes when you are. If you've ever sat through a holiday pretending the silence didn't hurt, if you've ever scrolled through pictures of your own family celebrating you like a memory instead of a person who's still breathing and hoping, if you've ever felt yourself slowly fade into the background of lives you helped build brick by brick, just know, you're not the only one. And I see you, clear as day. Because what happened to me didn't just happen in a single moment. It happened in years of shrinking myself so they could grow. In years of biting my tongue so they could smile. In years of giving everything and asking only to be remembered. Not praised, not worshipped, just remembered. And what I've come to learn is this. Mother's Day don't live in a caption. It don't live in a Facebook post or a perfectly filtered picture. It lives in presence, in knocking on the door you once ran through with joy. It lives in remembering the smell of your mother's kitchen, the sound of her voice calling your name when dinner was ready. And if that memory don't move you enough to show up while she's still here, then don't show up crying at her funeral like it makes up for the absence you wrapped her in while she was still alive. Because love that forgets ain't love. It's performance. It's polished guilt, dressed up as gratitude. And I won't be part of the show no more. And if you're someone who's ever felt like you were erased from a story you helped write, then I want to thank you for sitting with me, for listening, for staying through every word. And if this touched something in you, don't keep that quiet. Speak your truth below, tell your own story in the comments, or send it to me. And if this gave you something to carry, share it, like it, and remember, let's not go quiet in the places we used to shine. Not now, not ever. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, Granny loves you.